wartime, great tragedies occur to innocent people caught in the middle of the conflict. This Triumph Talks episode focuses on one such event when the U.S. 8th Air Force, made up of B17 bombers, were tasked with a mission that wasn't bombing military installations. This time, the target was civilians. Welcome back to Triumph Talks, John. Let's continue learning about the stories in your grandfather, Captain Jimmie Galloway's life that you preserved in A Boy from Cracker's Neck.
Well, thanks for having me. And as I've talked before, this particular story is probably the darkest of all of them, and the one that definitely haunted my granddad, my papaw, and I'm sure every other crew member in the 8th Air Force. And from there on out.
Yeah.
And I even went back and tried to do the research, and I was wondering about the suicide rates. They kept no statistics back then.
That's really surprising.
The only thing you could really find a lot of history about was it was very high for bomber crews.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And I think the particular reason for this is this story right here,
Wow.
because it definitely haunted my grandfather for, 30, almost 40 years. They wouldn't even talk about it. And, eventually I think he came to terms with it and stuff. And that's when he, first started telling me stories about it. But,
This is talking about an operation called Gomorrah. But you begin the chapter by kind of introducing the readers to the fact that the bomber crews learned to be able to recognize when they were going into a difficult mission.
Yes.
And some missions were hell, while others were straight to hell. And the night before a straight to hell mission, the meals were better. So you had a great meal and you're like, oh crap, something bad is coming. And for them, a great meal would be Spam with a Hershey bar.
Any meat.
Yeah, but I guess Spam was your grandfather's one of his favorites, according to your book. So they had Spam and a Hershey bar probably the night before they learned about a mission that they were about to conduct in July of 1943, where they were told they would be targeting German cities or a German city. And there was not a military target. So tell us a little bit more about that, and then we'll talk about what kind of reactions that they got initially. So.
Yeah, of course, the night before, like we talked about, was getting a little special meal, and they knew that either meant an ultra dangerous mission. Didn't quite know this one wasn't as dangerous, but they knew, as far as upper, the generals and they all knew that this would be a lot of kickback and a lot of resistance to the mission and stuff.
Yeah.
My granddad said when they'd have their pre-flight briefings, early in the mornings and stuff. And he said when he opened the door and he saw the general and his staff there, they knew something was up.
Yeah.
Because the general usually wasn't up that early in the morning doing briefings. It was majors and colonels and stuff like that. And to have a full-fledged general there, they knew something was up. And then, of course, when they showed them the maps,
and they let them know that this is what we're doing. So in the book, you wrote about. I'm just going to read a little bit here. The briefing room was abuzz with whispers. This was the first military-sanctioned targeting of civilians and civilian assets since Sherman's march to Atlanta during the Civil War, which created the term total warfare. So they were about to conduct total warfare. The room was filled with an intense silence as Captain Terry Fitzgerald finally stood up and spoke out against the mission because there was not a military complex target at those coordinates. So he was the first one to really stand up and push back. And to that, General Eaker said, Captain Fitzgerald, this isn't a request. This is an order and you will follow it. Gosh damn it. The Germans have been doing this for almost 2 years, and now it's our turn to return the favor. So do you want to share what had been going on the German side that kind of made this general say that?
Well, my papa would talk about missions before. You'd always have stray bombs. Missions could go astray, and you could drop bombs on civilian
Mhm.
target, but that was never the
Right.
mission. That was never, you did not try to do that. So they knew there were civilians that would get killed in bombing. When you bomb a big area, and this was a time where technology, wasn't exact like it is now and stuff. But when to sit in that briefing room and to have, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine getting orders that we're going to bomb
Mm.
civilians, and they knew that the Germans had been bombing cities. They knew about London. They knew other cities in France and through the Netherlands had been bombed and stuff.
Mhm.
But that was supposed to be what the bad guys did,
Yeah. Right. That
not
was to be
us.
expected
We're
because
the
they're the
good
bad
guys,
guys, and you write about
and
how they
we're
had bombed Rotterdam. Is when
yeah,
where that started with them back in 1940. The Germans started this kind
yes,
of total warfare. So it had been going on for a few years, and
yes.
it's pretty
But
awful.
as my granddad said, we're supposed to be Roy Rogers in the white hat.
Mhm.
And Roy Rogers don't kill civilians just to accomplish his mission. So yeah. I mean, I couldn't imagine myself to be sitting there knowing that was my
Yeah.
mission, no matter what the Germans had been
I
doing.
think that this is the kind of thing. I know this happened in Vietnam, where and
Yes.
they didn't know it going into it necessarily, but then they'd realize. Well, I'm sure they did know it sometimes. That they just massacred women and children. A little community where
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't the Viet Cong, but and I think that's a lot of the reason why our soldiers and our military end up with PTSD because of these things. And it's that's something that you're going to share with us a little more. But I just want to share the pushback that this Captain Fitzgerald said. He stood his ground, his jaw set in determination. I cannot, in good conscience, follow an order to indiscriminately bomb civilian populations. It goes against everything we stand for in America. And so in your book here, it kind of shows the back and forth between him and the general, and what ended up happening. It said, um, Captain Fitzgerald, you are under arrest. One of the MPs declared, his voice cold and emotionless. As the MPs escorted Captain Fitzgerald out of the room, the other pilots looked on in stunned silence, shocked by the turn of events. Some of them were filled with admiration for Captain Fitzgerald's bravery and integrity, while others were filled with fear for what lay ahead for them on the mission to Hamburg. So it was Hamburg they were going to.
Yeah.
Regardless of their thoughts and feelings, they all knew one thing for certain: their lives would never be the same again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite a scene to see one man actually stand up and end up being arrested and locked up. And I believe that they put him in Leavenworth. Um, and
Yes, they
but
did.
you're going to
That
share
that was what was
you're going
told
to
to
share
me.
the
Yes,
outcome of
that was
that with us. But that's
yeah,
it.
very
He
short.
didn't know if what he might have gone away for the rest of his life for standing up.
Yeah.
And so
Rereading this, one thing I wish I would have asked my granddad. I would bet money MPs were not commonplace in pilots' briefing rooms. So to have MPs ready,
they knew.
they knew how much pushback there would be.
Wow.
I never thought about that because 5, 6 in the morning. Why would you have MPs there?
Yeah.
And of course, the military brass knew this mission would cause problems
Wow.
in the ranks,
Wow.
and of course they you know pulled the trigger real quick on arresting them and made no bones about it. There wasn't going to be an argument about
Yeah.
it.
That was something, I think that we all kind of look a little bit at the bombing, dropping the bombs in Japan. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's a similar situation. And it's,
Oh,
and there's
absolutely.
still debate today about whether that was necessary. And it's a hard one because it certainly would have been a lot more death because of how they would have fought back. But, maybe we didn't have to drop the second one. And I don't know if there's been as much, I bring that up just to say, I don't know if there's
Yeah.
been as much conversation around Operation Gomorrah, but of course there was a lot of death that
Yeah.
happened. And maybe it did affect the morale and affected the war. Did your grandfather talk about, did he ever I mean, I'm sure he wished that he hadn't done that or had to do that. But did he ever have any kind of an opinion about the effect it might have had, and it's
Well,
achieving its purpose? You know
yeah.
what I'm trying to say?
Well, he did talk a little bit about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, okay, logically, you would think if your people of your nation is suffering, you would care enough to maybe think, hey, we either need to surrender or we need to quit.
Yeah.
But the realization that, of course, the German, Hitler and all his people, they could care
Right.
less. But see, that's hard to imagine that, you could kill all these civilians and it's not going to affect the military brass. So, in essence, it didn't
So
help end the
so
war any
maybe it really
quicker.
didn't. Wow, that's interesting to kind of
Yeah.
think that.
But see, you assume they care, but they don't.
That's that makes me want to start talking about local or current national
Yeah.
politics. But I'll just say that it continues on. There's a
Yeah.
pattern that when there is truly a bad side in this war. There's
Mm-hmm.
truly a bad side and a good side, but
Yeah.
and I think this is what's important to point out. Sometimes the good side has to do bad things. I have a Army Ranger friend who's been in operations, and he said, there's the right, the wrong side of heaven and the right side of hell is how he refers to that. And,
Yeah.
sometimes you gotta go there, and whether it's you're just following orders. But I wonder if you would read from your book.
Yes.
There's a really great excerpt that talks about kind of the effect that being part of this mission had on Jimmie.
And of course, before I start
Mm-hmm.
this to set this
Okay.
up was, Jim and his crew, they made it back from this mission, and this is after they bombed a civilian city. As Jimmie laid his head down this particular night, he wondered to himself that after performing a mission that they all knew had killed innocent women and children, if he had indeed lost his eternal soul. He pictured himself meeting his maker on Judgment Day, and the only answer to the day's atrocities would be, I was doing my job. Jimmie went to sleep in darkness thinking this truthful answer would not save his soul. Even a nightmare would have been welcome, but there was nothing but blackness again. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and the war raged on. Army intelligence had estimated about 37,000 civilians were killed during Operation Gomorrah. It was only towards the end of the war that they had heard the Pope of the Catholic Church had intervened to secure Captain Fitzgerald's release from Leavenworth military prison. The news was a welcome relief to Jimmie and his fellow bomber crews, a glimmer of hope in the midst of all the destruction and chaos. Operation Gomorrah and events that followed would leave a lasting impact on Jimmie and all the 8th Air Force. It was a turning point in the war and a reminder of the atrocities that can be committed in the name of victory. The memory of Captain Terry Fitzgerald and his bravery would always serve as a testament to the importance of standing up for one's beliefs, no matter the consequences. Captain Fitzgerald was a brave and honorable man. And, when I think about it, if both sides, if honorable men had stood up, we would have never had the war to begin with.
We like to think so, huh? I like to think so. Sometimes I think that the people in power, there's a reason why we say they're in power. And but we have to have more power among those that are willing to stand up than those who have the power to create so much destruction in the world. I wonder how much people know about Captain Fitzgerald. Do you know if he's a well-known figure for standing up against this, or do you just know about him because of your grandpa talking about it?
Just through my grandfather, so many of those records were destroyed. I tried to pull more military records, and I definitely wanted records of particular missions. Gomorrah would have been one I would have loved to have seen what all squadrons, who all was involved. A lot of that's lost to history. Days before, digital records and stuff, everything was on paper, and if there was a fire in a warehouse,
it's such a shame.
it's
That's
gone.
such a shame. But that's interesting, because if indeed Captain Fitzgerald's stand for morality has been unknown to history until now, until you wrote this book, until your grandfather told you these stories, and I circle back to this theme because it's my passion, really, and that is that we all have stories, and we all have the history that's been told to us by our family members who've been a part of the past. And we have information to share when we do what you did, and that is to write it down and then to present it to the world. And I just hope that those who are listening think about what they know, what things have their ancestors and told them about their lives, that maybe, even a hero like Captain Fitzgerald that's going completely unknown, unsung, that you can shine a light on, and I hope that Captain Fitzgerald is someone that people start to talk about because of reading your book and seeing, he's apparently, according to the story, maybe just the one man that had to be walked out. And he was willing to be, to really put a light on what he did. He was willing to be locked up in Leavenworth. And I work with incarcerated veterans. That's something I'll talk about more in the future as I go along. I work very closely with incarcerated veterans. And a lot of veterans actually end up in prison, which is another conversation. But what I can tell you, because I've gone inside and worked with them for 7 years now in Texas Department of Criminal Justice, prison is horrible. It's just horrible. Oh, and I'm sure Leavenworth was horrible. And but this man was willing to give up essentially his own freedom to protect the people that he didn't want to be a part of killing. And I just want to take a moment and just kind of give him the honor. It almost chokes me up to think about what he did. And let me say this too, and that is not to put any shade on those who fulfilled the mission and served our country in any way, not in this story, nor in the Vietnam War or any experience, because like my Army Ranger friend said, sometimes you just have to go to the wrong side of heaven and the right side of hell. Hopefully I said that right the first time. So I'm not casting judgment, except that when we do see people who stand up with so much cost to themselves, I just think it's deserving of really taking note. Because characters like that, like you said, if we had more people like Captain Fitzgerald, this world would be a better place. On that note, I just want to say to all those who are watching, if you are finding value in the stories that are being shared here on Triumph Talks, please be sure to like and subscribe. It helps us to keep more coming to you, and it helps other people find it as well. And stories like this, I just think everybody should know. Then click on the thumbnail that you see on the screen for more with John Peace and his book, A Boy from Cracker's Neck. And the next story that we have coming up will actually be another dark one. But we have some funny ones after that, because we're going to be talking about Black Thursday, October 14th, 1943. So be sure to click on that thumbnail and watch the next one. Thank you for following us.